right, so here is the session for this last section. We're going to discuss the reconciliation, right? So we reconcile on a regular basis, be it weekly, monthly, quarterly, or per term, and at the end of the school year, right? So that big year-end reconciliation is coming up in just a few months, right? So we'll start that process in June and closing out the books, but then by the time the whole reconciliation process deadline arrives, it's closer to August and sometimes September. So let us go ahead. Oh, let me turn off my Teams messages. I can do that so it's not popping up during our webinar. All right, so after discussing reconciliation, we'll talk about program compliance, right? That's making sure that we are complying with statute around both federal and state laws as it concerns Cal Grant and other CSAC programs. And then we will discuss the compliance review process, aka the audit, right? We'll talk about what that audit process entails and some of the common audit findings. So reconciliation is basically just ensuring that all eligible students are paid in the correct amount that they should be, and that all campus departments are working together to reconcile those records successfully, right? We want to make sure that we're using funds for the 25-26 school year, and then at the end of that year-end reconciliation, if you have any leftover funds, those would be returned to the commission versus letting them roll over to the next year. So that's part of the reconciliation process, is returning any unused funds. We want to make sure that schools have well-written, strongly written policies and that you're following those policies. And our audits team will look at those things when they come to review your campus. And then you'll see, and we will begin to send out announcements and alerts, letting schools know as we are approaching year-end reconciliation and when the final deadline would be. And this graphic here is just simply depicting that this involves all of these entities, right? CSAC is instrumental in providing the reports that you use for the reconciliation process, but all of these teams and departments within your campus are involved in the reconciliation process. So let's look at the reconciliation timeline. And every year, these dates and open and close dates are more or less the same. They differ slightly from year to year, but the payment period is pretty much the bulk of the school year, right? That's when we are posting payments and adjustments for all of our students. And then as you see announcements approaching year-end reconciliation, we will start to let schools know, hey, clean up your records, clean up those books. Let's get the final payments and adjustments posted to our students' records. And so that's from July to August. And then we'll announce that final reconciliation, right? We're going to at some point close out web grants so that no more payments or adjustments can be reported. And then if your school has any excess funds remaining, unused Cal Grant funds, that's when we would ask for those back through an invoice letter. And then if the funds are not returned, then we will begin to send penalty letters to campuses. So we have our first little poll here. Let me pull up my poll and see about testing your knowledge. Right now, we're going to ask which offices on campuses should support the Cal Grant reconciliation process. And as soon as I launch this poll, I will let you see that. All right, so, oops, that is not the right one. End poll. Let me grab the other poll. Apologies. Okay, so we want this one. It's got to drop down to my list here. Okay. Which offices on campus should support the Cal Grant recon process? The financial aid office only, financial aid office, registrar and fiscal office, or financial aid office and registrar only? What do we think? I'll give you just a couple more seconds. Most of you have already dropped in your responses, but I'll give that a couple more moments. And let's call it good. So most of you got that right? Most of you chose option B, which is the correct answer. So well done to those of you who got that correct. Nice job. Yeah, as I stated on the earlier slide, the year-end reconciliation process does involve multiple departments on campus. So well done. All right, let us proceed. So the steps to reconcile, we break this down into 4 steps so that it makes it easy for campuses. In reality, you might be, knee deep in the reconciliation process. And so it might not seem as easy as what you're seeing on screen because it involves a lot of students that you're having to drill down to student level to get the data that you need. But ultimately, let's try that again. Ultimately, what we're doing here is we want to first ensure that payments match student statuses, meaning if that student is full-time enrolled, that they're being paid as a full-time student. If they're attending 3/4 time, that they receive a 3/4 time payment. And so, right, you've got 2 books that you're reconciling. You've got your own ledgers, and then you've got the CSAC reports, right? The CSAC rosters that you're reporting payments on, but you're also truing those up against campus ledgers to compare what's actually being dispersed. What's being reported and what's being dispersed could be two different things, but we ultimately are going to make sure that those are the same, and that is one of the key steps of reconciliation. Accounting for funds received. So some campuses in years past, remember that we were giving advanced funds in the 25-26 school year. That did not happen just because of budget reasons. But in future years and in past years, certainly advanced funds were a regular practice. So schools would start the school year with some money in their quote bank, CSAC money, or Cal Grant money. Now in 25-26, since we didn't do a funds advance, what we did do is supplemental payments. So every time schools will report a payment on their roster, that triggers our state controller's office to then generate those funds and electronically transfer them to the school. Next, we want to make sure that each student was dispersed the correct dollar amounts. So aside from the actual enrollment status, which is what we're looking at here, we want to make sure that for that enrollment status, the student actually got the correct dollar disbursement, and that is reported correctly both on the school ledger and in web grants. And then finally, making sure that any excess funds are returned to CSAC after that final recon. So first, again, let's break down the steps, making sure that our payments are reported accurately. Reporting the payments in web grants, adjusting the payment codes, right, as the students, if students are not enrolled full-time, then you would use the 3/4 time or half time code, and then making adjustments, right? If students are withdrawing, if they are receiving Pell Grant funds, that might involve a return to title funds, and then that could also involve an adjustment to the Cal Grant award amount. So be aware that when you're performing R2T4s, it may also affect the Cal Grant funds. So you can always refer to the Cal Grant handbook for additional information on R2T4, and watch for limited eligibility situations. If you were in attendance yesterday, you saw that we went through payment scenarios, and we did actually use a limited eligibility scenario. So those can get pretty tricky because of web grants defaults, and those often involve an override of the auto-populated amount that web grants will calculate. Next, we want to make sure that all funds that were received are accounted for. So again, those are either advanced funds, which in 25-26 we didn't do. So we're operating on simply supplemental funds. So every time a school reports a payment, that payment is going to be sent electronically from our state controller's office. And you would review that on the monthly payment activity report. That's where you're going to see all of those advances or supplemental payments from the state controller's office. And if you have any questions about the EFT process, you can certainly reach out to this email address here. third step is to verify the disbursement amount. So we want to make sure that the payments that were reported to CSAC were also accurately dispersed to each student. So if you reported a full-time payment, that student was actually paid full-time dollars. And then checking for reconciled payments or adjustments on a weekly basis. So for those of you who, again, who were in attendance yesterday, or maybe it was on day one. They've all begun to merge at this point. But we did also cover this area where a payment or an adjustment starts out as an accepted payment or adjustment. So, and then after the weekend processing, those payments and adjustments become reconciled payments and reconciled adjustments. And of course, checking that accept reject report for any rejected payments or transactions, and that we can resolve those. You can use these two reports, and you have to use these two reports to successfully do the reconciliation process. So the summary report starts out big and just looks at how much in total dollars your school dispersed in, say, Cal Grant A funds, Cal Grant B funds, Cal Grant B access funds, that sort of thing. And then the detail report is where you drill down to student level data. And that's how you identify a specific student that may have been dispersed incorrectly. And then we would resolve that. Oh, and there's another pop-up here. So you can actually select the specific type of reconciliation report you want to use right here. So you will start it with the summary report. Once you identify, for example, that it's the Cal Grant B access funds that were had a discrepancy, you would then drill down to that detail report and hone in on a specific term, a specific Cal Grant type, and award type. So this would be, say, fall term or spring term, Cal Grant B, and award type might be that access award once you've identified where the discrepancy lies. And then the final step is to return those unused funds. So that is going to be submitted in the form of a check along with a letter. And this is where you're going to list those students' names and CSAC IDs for which you're returning the funds if those students had an overpayment, or you're just returning funds because of unused funds. And then you would mail that here. Okay, that's it on the reconciliation piece. Let's look at program compliance. And I'll encourage you again, if you have any questions on anything we've covered this week or today, drop those in Q&A so my colleagues can answer them. So the program compliance section, right? All of your campuses as Cal Grant administering campuses started with an institutional participation agreement. So if your campus has been administering Cal Grant since the 60s, or no, actually, I don't think Cal Grant even existed in the 60s, but in the 80s, for example, that institutional participation agreement would have been drafted before your school was deemed eligible to participate. That is the binding contract between CSAC and our campuses. So we're currently using the IPA for the 2023 through 2027 school year. And then any school that is eligible to administer Cal Grant shows up on the CSAC eligible schools list. So in addition to returning unused funds through the reconciliation process, interest also has to be remitted. So throughout the school year, those Cal Grant funds are held in an interest-bearing account. And so when CSAC announces that interest remittance is due, it's always due on March 1st of the calendar year. It's due on March 1st for the prior calendar year. And it gets a little confusing because we operate in academic years and fiscal years, and in this case, we're looking at the entire calendar year. So that interest that was accrued from January 1st of 2025 through December 31st of 2025 would have been captured in this interest remittance, which was due on March 1st. And then SB 70 reporting. So for those campuses who offer programs, I'm confusing that with our the other report that campuses use. For campuses that have programs that lead to employment. There's another type of report that those campuses are submitting as well. But SB 70 is an annual report that schools have to submit with this data. You report what your enrollment levels and persistence and graduation rates are. And this is where you also include job placement rate and wage information for those programs. So notice that the data submission deadline was extended through the 17th. That's today. So hopefully this gave you all time to get those SB 70s in. I understand it's a really big job, which is probably why that deadline was initially extended. And then you can see the file specs here on the SB 70 webpage. There you go. You probably already know this, but most CSAC imports or uploads have to be done in a text or CSV format. And California license exam, that was the other exam I was conflating with our SB 70 report. So similarly, this one does ask for information about employment or programs related to employment specific to programs that your campuses offer that do require passage of a state license exam, like nursing. That's one of the big ones, right? A nursing program, respiratory therapists. There are others out there too, but any program that you offer that leads to employment and that requires a state license exam needs to be reported on here. And yeah, this is an important FYI. Even schools that do not offer employment-related programs have to submit this form and simply state that they do not offer such a program. Oh, and there is an image of that California License Exam Certification form. And there they are right there. Most of the common ones are registered nursing, dental assistant, hygiene, that sort of thing, even cosmetology. So check that out. And yeah, you have through 5 p.m. today if you haven't finished that yet. So let's look at the compliance review next. So as I mentioned, schools will be selected for an audit to make sure that we're all in compliance with federal and state laws and regulations, as well as that institutional participation agreement, even the Cal Grant Handbook, our operations memos and special alerts. These are all ways that we get that information to our campuses on how to administer the Cal Grant. So we want to make sure that our policies, our procedures are in compliance with these statutes. So the review process looks something like this. Initially, an auditor will reach out to likely somebody in the registrar's office or financial aid office director, perhaps, and that individual 2 to 3 months before they're going to schedule the audit will reach out and say, hey, your school is selected for an audit, and they work out what date or what week actually works best, because the audit takes place over the course of about a week. And then once that date has been determined, the auditor will send an engagement letter identifying the date that it begins, that the audit begins, and they will also identify any records that they're going to have the school pull. Typically, it's about 40 records that they're going to ask you to pull at random from E1 students, E2 students, Cal Grant A, B, C, etc. They'll specify in the letter what types of records they would like the school to have ready for them and to send them electronic copies so that they can have that ready for a desk audit. Then they will have the entrance interview, in which the auditor will invite other, uppers in the campus, everybody who really is going to be involved in this process. That's going to be members of the financial aid office. It could involve the registrar. It may even involve IT if it's identified, for example, that your student information system needs some updating or something along that line. So there are several people that might be invited to the audit, and so that will be formalized there. And then the field review begins. That's where the auditor begins reviewing all the records that they've asked you to present to them, those 40 records that we mentioned. After those records have been reviewed, the exit interview will review with the team at your campus what findings, if any, were identified and where the areas of weaknesses might be so that the campus is well aware of what needs to be fixed going forward. And then the auditor, will provide a draft report to the campus, letting them know what the findings were and what the actions that the school is going to be asked to take, be it additional training, be it there are funds that were overpaid and need to be returned to the commission. There will be various actions that will be taken, and so the auditor will spell that out in the draft report. And then the institution has 30 days to respond on how they're going to fix those and improve their performance going forward, at which point that whole audit will be closed out. So some of the common audit findings that we see are around grade level policy. Either the grade level or the education level policy was not, the education level, not the policy, but the education level of an individual student or multiple students was not verified at all. Perhaps it was flagged for verification and was not verified, or it was verified incorrectly based on your school's EL policy. And that includes our community colleges as well. Some community colleges will cap their EL at an EL2, so sophomore level, whereas other campuses will actually count it all the way through senior year. So follow your school's policy around education level determination. SAP policy, either not being in compliance with the Title IV or AB 789, which set the federal or set Cal Grant processes at the federal minimums around GPA, PACE, maximum time frame, et cetera. Those have to be consistent with the federal minimum standards. In years past, schools could have set more stringent policy than what the feds recommended or what the feds policies were. And so now we've level set to meet the federal minimum standards. And then incorrect Cal Grant payments. So schools might mistakenly post incorrect Cal Grant payments based on that enrollment status. And we looked at that when we were discussing the reconciliation process, right? That payments have to match that student's enrollment status, payment dollar amounts, and also around census date, right? CSAC has recommended guidelines around payments and timing around census. And many schools do adopt CSAC's guidelines, but you may have your own policy that differ from ours, and that's fine, provided that schools are following their policy. So just be really, really mindful of that. And then policies and procedures. Either some schools may not have any written policies or procedures, or may not have a specific policy that's required, that's written or documented, or they have policies, but they haven't been consistently following them. Grant record changes, right? Sometimes changes, well, not sometimes, but all the time, if there is a change to a student's household size, income, assets, those things can affect awarding, right? So a student may have been preliminarily awarded when in fact additional information comes out that may impact that award outcome. So we need those changes reported through the grant record change process. And that way we can reprocess that Cal Grant and hopefully the student remains eligible, or perhaps they were initially found to be ineligible when in fact, due to the G21 changes, it then makes your student eligible. So super important that we get those things reported through G21. And then reconciling, right? We just talked about that. Either the issues that can arise around reconciliation have to do with either the funds not being reconciled on that student by student level. What our auditor shared with us is that some schools will reconcile to the grand total, but not student by student, and that's really where you see that individual detail, and that's what needs to be reported if there are funds that are being returned. or perhaps no interest was remitted. Those are findings that can occur through the reconciliation process. And finally, security and confidentiality, right? We all have so much access to very, very personal and sensitive student data, so it's our due diligence to safeguard that data. So it's the responsibility of the campus web grant system administrator to not only grant access to web grants for new staff that onboard, but also remembering to disable access as staff depart. Not sharing login credentials, right? Those are pretty basic items, but it still sometimes comes up where we discover that schools are sharing those login details or logins when we just don't want to do that. So best practices, reconcile on a regular basis, weekly or monthly, keeping your files organized in chronological order, detailing all the monies received, the monies that have been reported through your student payments, etc. Performing self audits, that's a really good one, right? So in advance of a CSAC audit, hopefully your own team or you've hired an outside team to actually audit your books, and that you already know going into a CSAC audit that you have well organized records. Asking questions, right? Our auditors are actually really nice people. So they are very open to answering your questions, and we really all want our schools to succeed. So please don't be shy about asking questions if your school is chosen for an audit. It's not a bad thing. I promise you. Every school, and if you think about the number of schools in California, 116 community colleges, what is it, like 23 CSUs, 13 UCs, and I don't know how many privates, but that's a lot of campuses. So every campus at some point will be audited. It's just a matter of when. And so there are risk analyses that our audits team uses to determine when a school will be audited. So it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that your time has come to have another audit. So again, use that as a learning opportunity and ask good questions. Attend trainings and webinars, whether they're CSAC trainings, FAFSA or FSA trainings. Attend those trainings so that you always are staying abreast of the newest, latest, and greatest information. Training new staff. This becomes a really big deal when we have staff that are retiring and leaving 25 years of knowledge behind. So make sure that we have trained new staff, that we have strongly written handbooks and internal processes to help that new staff on board. And then consulting with your internal and external colleagues. So not only people within your campus, but hopefully you have sister campuses that you can reach out to for best practices or for extra help. Reviewing those policies and procedures that you do have drafted and updating them as needed. As we mentioned, we send out announcements regularly through our listserv, and many times those are impacting our processes and procedures and would necessitate an update. I'll give you an example. When I think it's SB 150 rolled out for the Chafee Grant program, it's got a whole different set of SAP standards for our Chafee students as compared with every other student. So your school, if you are administering Chafee Grant, likely has two SAP policies. One that is specific to Chafee Grant students under SB 170, and one SAP policy for everybody else. So that's just one example of when you might need to update procedures. And then if you have not yet registered for our listserv, where we make these announcements about upcoming policy changes and deadlines and that sort of thing, be sure to sign up here. So we have our next poll. Let me pull this up and we will ask you this question. You can see it on the screen right now. So you can already start thinking about it while I am pulling that poll up. One moment here while I find it in here we are. Okay, so the question is, you notice that your office's policies and procedures for Cal Grant are outdated. What should you do? Are you going to call CSAC immediately? Are you going to talk to your director or compliance officer about that outdated information? Or are you just going to start making changes because it's pretty essential that you do it quickly? So let's see what folks are thinking. I'll give that just a couple more moments on the screen here for that poll. And yeah, this is a pretty basic one. You all pretty much got it, right? It's this one. It's B. It's talking to your director or compliance officer about the outdated information, at which point then you can all make the determination to update those policies and procedures. So great job, everybody, answering those questions. Thank you for that. And we're just about at the end of this thing. So if all of you have, not all of you, but if some of you have attended our all three sessions this week, A, B, and C, and would like a certificate of completion, we would love to send you one. And even if you didn't finish all three sessions this week, as we mentioned, you can catch another session that you didn't catch this week again in June, or perhaps you already caught another session at the previous offering, which is about 2 months ago. So we're offering these workshops about every 2 months. So once you've attended all three sessions, and if you would like a certificate of completion, please complete the survey that we send to you, and we'll try to get that out to you in the next week. Please attend that survey, and what we're really after is your feedback, because we want to know how this information was received, if this is applicable, how it can be improved at the next session. So please give us some feedback so that we can incorporate your ideas into a future session. And then, once you have done that, have completed all three sessions and submitted the survey, let us know by emailing us at training@csac.ca.gov. Let us know that you attended all three sessions, and then we will send you that certificate of completion, which has our executive director, Dr. Daisy Gonzalez's signature on there. And then with that, I want to just let you know what our callback numbers are and our email addresses. One for you all, school support, right? You have a sort of a backdoor number that gets you in a lot more quickly than if you were to call student support. So please have your students use this contact information. And if you want to reach out directly to the training team to request a trainer for a virtual session, certainly shoot us an email here and we'll send a training request to you. And then I wanted to just invite any final questions. If you'd like to raise your hand, if you didn't get your questions answered through the Q&A, please do raise your hand and we will be sure to let you unmute your mic and ask your question live. I'll give that just a moment. And while we're just checking to see if any hands come up, I want to again thank you for your time and your attention and your engagement. It's really, really nice to see people participate in the polls, and hopefully that is a way to gauge that you are actually learning something new. That's another goal. We hope that you all have learned something new. So I will just check again with the Q&A, and I don't see that anything else has popped in. I did see a nice comment though from somebody. It said, let me find my chat box again. Yeah, so I think it was Loretta said that this was really informative and helpful. So thank you for that comment, Loretta. And I don't see any hands come up. So thank you again, everybody, for your time this week and for your service to our students. We're so appreciative, and we hope to see you at a future session. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend. Bye-bye now.